I don't believe Superwoman exists, and too many women have had the idea sold to them that they can have it all at all times. Men don't have it all either.
Psychologist Dr. Joyce Brothers. Today on Now I've Heard Everything. I'm Bill Thompson. She was America's first pop psychologist. Dr. Joyce Brothers actually shot to fame in 1955 when she was just 28, when she won the big prize on TV quiz show The $64,000 Question, displaying her knowledge of all things, boxing. Well, she turned that appearance on TV into a 5-decade career, which involved going on television. She had a monthly magazine column. She was all over the place. Dr. Joyce Brothers was the go-to pop psychologist. Now, along the way, she also wrote a number of books, including a 1988 book called The Successful Woman, based on interviews that she'd done with dozens of very successful women. I met her, that was the first time I met her, actually, was in 1988 when she was on a book tour for that book. In just a moment, our conversation.
We're about to take a step back and listen to an iconic voice from our recent past. It's one of over 10,000 interviews noted radio personality Bill Thompson did over a 30-year span. We think you'll enjoy it.
So here now, from 1988, Dr. Joyce Brothers.
Will the woman who reads your book learn how to become the successful woman?
I would hope that she would learn a great deal from the book in becoming a successful woman, because I deal with the personal lives and the business lives of women who are successful all over the country. I interviewed a great many women, some whose names we may not know, for example, Lois Weiss, who owns her own advertising agency, CEOs of companies who are women, and famous women, Dolly Parton, Lynn Redgrave, Sally Quinn, Gloria Steinem, Joan Rivers, Jean Kirkpatrick, Barbara Walters, women of all kinds who've shared with me how they've managed this juggling act. And in my own life, I've done that. So I have tried to make this a compendium for women who do want to be successful in their personal lives and in their business lives, much in the same way that the original Iacocca book was read, not only by people who were interested in the story of his life, but who wanted some pointers on how to make themselves as successful.
Superwoman does not exist, does she?
No, I don't believe Superwoman exists, and most of the women who I interviewed said she doesn't exist. In fact, Barbara Walters said that a person who can juggle all things at all times is someone she admires, but not someone she's ever met. I don't think we leap buildings in a single bound. I think we're lucky if we don't bump into the buildings. And too many women have had the idea sold to them that they can have it all at all times. Men don't have it all either. At some times we find certain satisfactions, at other times we find more other things important in our lives, and we learn how to balance. And those women who are the most successful decide what will give them the most satisfaction, and they go for it. Now, that satisfaction may change from time to time. For some women, they stayed home when their children were little, and that gave them the most satisfaction, and then started their careers later on. Julia Child said that she was just a kind of an appendage to her husband, and she only became famous at age 35 when she discovered that she liked to cook and wanted to share it with other people.
One of the most illuminating quotes, which I'll have to paraphrase because I can't remember the exact word, was, I believe it was Gloria Steinem, who had told you that the idea of Superwoman was invented by men, that feminists didn't invent it, that men, in effect, said, okay, fine, you can have a career as long as the kids are still fed and the house is clean and everything else like that. And I hadn't thought about that before.
I think you're absolutely right, and that's just what she said. And one of the things that men haven't thought about and are beginning to think about is that some of the successes of their wives have come out of their own creature comforts. Many years ago, in the Eisenhower era, they did a very careful study in which they asked people about their own happiness. And the happiest of all people, in terms of what they said about themselves, was married men. Then came single women, then married women, and least happy of all were bachelors. Now they've done these studies again, not quite as complete in terms of numbers of people as they did the original studies, but what they're beginning to find is that the married woman who has a career or a job or outside interests out of the home, and children and a husband, in terms of what she says about herself, she is the happiest person of all. And then come single women, and then come married men. Married men have gone from the point where they considered themselves king of the manor to the point where they're saying to themselves, what's going on here? I used to be able to come home and the kids were fed and bathed and shiny and rosy and ready to play with daddy. And I come home and it's my turn to feed and bathe. And surprising, and this was very surprising to me, that the men who have children who are a little bit older are less happy when they have a lot of care of those children than the men who don't. I would think that the more time you spent with your kids, the happier you would be. But apparently, for the first time in 10,000 years, important men are taking care of babies. And babies, you get hooked on. You just love it. But when a child gets to be 3 and lies down on the supermarket floor and has a fit because he or she can't buy the thing they saw on television, and you're alone and your wife is somewhere else, and you've got responsibility for that child, and everybody's looking at you and saying, what kind of a father is that? And you're worried that you may be pulled in for some kind of child abuse, it gets to be much less fun. It's also less fun when the baby throws up.
True. Most men in that situation, no matter how many times they've seen Mr. Mom or 3 Men and a Baby, always still call for the wife.
Yeah, it's your child.
That's right. You know, you pointed out something else in here that I hadn't thought about really in concrete terms, but it's so true that you said, I think 20 or 30 years ago, that most women who came to you for advice were those who were having trouble with their marriage. They feared that their marriage was about to fall apart. And today it is the women trying to juggle the marriage and the career and the family and the household and the banking and the sex and the children and this and that and the other thing. Does a woman need to be consider herself a failure if she's a very successful executive, she drives a big car, and her family is well, the kids are grown and they're beautiful children, they get good grades, but the house is a mess?
There is nothing innately feminine about household tasks. If there were, you'd expect to find it in all cultures. And there are cultures that believe that housework is too holy for a woman to do, and only men are allowed to do it. And there are cultures that believe that only men know how to take care of children, and women do what they're innately supposed to do. They do the heavy work, and men take care of the kids and sit around and play with them. Now, if the house is a mess, she tends to think it's her fault. It's not her fault. It's their fault. And also, if you are doing the best you can, I really don't think it's so important if you have some dust kittens under the bed. I would rather that the sex on the bed was better, even though there were dust kittens under the bed.
After this short break, Dr. Joyce Brothers explains what most women do wrong.
Are you enjoying this conversation so far?
And would you like to get a copy of the book we're talking about?
Just tap the link in our show notes or visit our website, heardeverything.com.
When you make a purchase through our affiliate links, you're also supporting this podcast.
And we thank you for your support.
Now back to my 1988 conversation with Dr. Joyce Brothers.
You just have a limited amount of energy, and you need to use it for those things that give you satisfaction. And I think that's important to say that to yourself. I'm doing the best I can, and I'm doing those things that are right for me. Most women do things the wrong way, too, in terms of making decisions about their lives. They put their children first, they put their husbands second, and they put themselves last. And what that engenders is a great deal of resentment, buried resentment. I'm not talking about selfishness, because sometimes what is best for you at that moment is sacrificing, not showing up at work, but staying home and taking care of a child who's running some fever. Or it might be that you do decide to give up the trip to Paris and do something that is necessary for your family at home. But that you do because it is best for you, not because you're sacrificing. Because when you sacrifice, you resent. And when you're a resentful person, you are not a good wife, you are not a good mother. A nurse does not work 24 hours a day. He or she has a tour of duty, a tour of fun in their own lives, and a tour of time to sleep, and they come back being a better nurse. And the same thing is true of a woman. And a woman is going to live with herself for a lifetime, longer than she'll live with her children, who will grow up and have lives of their own, probably longer than she'll live with her husband, because women outlive men on an average of 8-point-something years. And so those decisions that are basically affecting her lives and the lives of her children should be made on the basis of what gives her the most satisfaction, what's best for her in the long run.
I think it's also going to be helpful to so many countless numbers of women to read that you, a successful woman, and that other successful women, such as the many that you've interviewed, also have your doubts and your fears and your frustrations. To the public, at large, when we see you on the covers of magazines and on television talk shows, you have it all together. You have everything. You have fame and you have fortune. You have wonderful children. You have a career. You probably go home and make soufflés.
Enormous fatigue.
But it's so refreshing to hear that. I guess realistically we must know that you have problems, but they can't possibly be the same kind of problems we have.
I think that all of us are just dealing with a certain amount of guilt. If we are a full-time homemaker, we feel guilty because we're not putting money aside for our children's future. We're not putting as much emphasis into self-development as our husband may be doing. If we are getting a paycheck for work, and I don't like to say working woman because they've measured energy consumption, and a laborer building a road uses more energy than a person uses less energy, than a person doing housework. So, particularly laborers building the road between here and Baltimore. Have you ever noticed that there is one man who builds all the roads and everybody stands around and watches him? And I think it's the same man in the various parts of the country. But at any rate, the woman who is getting a paycheck for her work feels guilty because she isn't there at the first step that the baby takes, or the first teething, the first time the tooth shows up. What she doesn't realize is that maybe it's the 12th step, but it's just as much a milestone for her and the baby because they're celebrating it and it's so important to her. So I think all of us along the way deal with a certain amount of looking over our shoulder and saying, well, are we really as successful as we'd like to be?
Is the concept of, and I put this in quotation marks, quality time a valid concept, or is it, as I read in Parents Magazine, I think in an article a couple of years ago, fine, when you have quality time, you want to sit down at 6:30 and have quality time, but the kid is ready to climb the walls?
You have to have an awful lot of quantity time before you can have quality time, because quality time is not something, as you say, you can schedule by your watch. An adult can schedule. I came in to an appointment with you and we had a definite time. But the fun things of life don't happen by clock time. They happen as a little bit of lagniappe. You're making cookies with your kids, and all of a sudden everything is great fun. But you can't sit down and have a discussion of E equals MC squared with your kids when you want to do it. So there has to be the concept of quality time is terrific.
It works with a spouse, doesn't it? You can have quality. You can schedule quality time with your spouse.
You can schedule quality time, and a lot of women, many of the successful women that I interviewed do just that, and even schedule sex. They say that it doesn't take, everybody says, well, it takes the spontaneity out of it, but they say that yes, it isn't spontaneous, but they have all this expectation time of looking forward. One woman told me that she actually puts in the schedule for sex in her husband's date book, and I think that's going too far.
Dr. Joyce Brothers died in 2013. She was 85. Now you can get your copy of The Successful Woman by Dr. Joyce Brothers by tapping the link in our show notes, by clicking the link in the description below if you're listening to this on YouTube, or by going to our website, heardeverything.com. We may earn an Amazon commission if you make a purchase. Heardeverything.com is where you can also find my interviews with two of the many women that Dr. Joyce Brothers interviewed for her book, my 1994 conversation with the great Dolly Parton.
I've been at it a long time, and I've left myself wide open for anything that people want to say about me. It's not like that I haven't flaunted most of the stuff they talk about, and it's not like I don't say most of the stuff they say.
And my 1992 conversation with the co-founder of Ms. Magazine, Gloria Steinem.
I think what makes us connect to each other is precisely that we tell the truth to each other. If I hadn't had the same experiences as many of the other women there and spoken out about them and vice versa, we wouldn't feel that kind of instant intimacy with each other.
And of course, we post new episodes of Now I've Heard Everything every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and you can find us everywhere you listen to podcasts. And thank you so much for listening. Next time on Now I've Heard Everything, this is something very special for me. I stopped interviewing 10 years ago. I retired, as it were, from the interviewing after 30 years. I'd interviewed thousands of people, many of whom you've heard right here on Now I've Heard Everything. But now I've come out of retirement, as it were. I'm going to begin doing new interviews again, and my very first one is a great one. Next time on Now I've Heard Everything, a Now I've Heard Everything exclusive with best-selling author Brad Meltzer.
In the 1960 election, when it's JFK versus Richard Nixon, it's the closest election in the 20th century, bitterly fought. The country is divided down the center. Whatever side you're on, you think the other side are horrible, awful people. Does that sound familiar to you, Bill? Right? And it's exactly where we are now. And it's this moment in time where there's so much hate and venom dredged up toward JFK. You can't be surprised when someone takes a shot.
That's next time on Now I've Heard Everything. I'm Bill Thompson.